Hello, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, how fair is free trade in Colombia? We look at why thousands of farmers say they're fed up with the country's trade policies. Our digital producer Malika Bilal is here looking out for your live feedback. How did this story get onto the stream, Malika?
How did it catch our eye? Well, if our audience at home follows online trends like our staff here at the stream does, they may have noticed a hashtag that was trending worldwide. I pulled it up on my screen here where Alexandra Locke, one of our producers, put up the stats. Colombia strike stats last month. 218,000 for Para Nacional and Cacerolazo Nacional, which is the pots and pans protest, 55,000, and it trended worldwide. So of course, today we want to hear from all of you at home. Join the conversation with hashtag AJStream.
In Spanish and in English?
Please.
Seriously?
Yes. We'll see what we can do.
All right, we might need a little bit of help. I have just the man to help us out, Juan Carlos Hidalgo. Juan Carlos is a trade policy analyst with the Cato Institute. That's a think tank here in Washington, D.C. Juan Carlos, it's great to have you in the stream.
Hello, how are you?
Very well, thank you. We'll be hearing more from Juan Carlos in just a moment. Now, the Colombian Farmers strike is all over Twitter, as Malika just told you. Here are some of the hashtags connected to the story. Struggling to stay in business. It's the reason why so many farmers in Colombia have been protesting against their country's economic policies. The Colombian economy has grown in recent years, but free trade agreements with foreign countries have opened their markets to cheaper imports. Critics say that's left many small-scale farmers unable to compete. For weeks, farmers blocked roads and pretty much shut down commerce. On Saturday, President Juan Manuel Santos got many of them to end their blockade. And in return, he's promised reform and more government assistance. So today, we want to examine the impact of free trade in Colombia. And to help us do that, we have Alberto Bejarano, who joins us on Skype from Bogota. He opposes free trade agreements and is a labor advisor to the Colombian Senate. And also on Skype in New York, Robert Valencia is a Colombian writer who covers Latin America for Global Voices Online. So Robert, Alberto, and Juan Carlos, it's great to have all of you in the stream. Looking forward to the conversation. Let me start with Alberto though. Alberto, on my computer, I have a picture of you from August the 23rd, where you're talking to some strikers. You're out there, you're in the middle of the strikes. I just want to get a sense of the atmosphere.
Well, that's a picture of a strike in the Valle del Cauca region in Colombia, in a sugar plantation. That's where we're having a lot of difficulties in terms of labor rights and labor issues there. And all this has to do with international trade relationships, especially with the United States and European markets. So there's a definite impact on labor issues in this case in particular, related to free trade and to international markets and conditions.
So, you give me the reason behind the strike, but what was the atmosphere like to have thousands of farmers blockading roads, stopping commerce in Colombia? That's a big deal, right?
Yes, it's a big deal, and it's something we're seeing more often in Colombia for the last perhaps 2 or 3 years. And it's something that definitely has marked this year. It's not only 1 month. I think we're experiencing through more than 6 or 7 months of protests. And people are reacting in Colombia. People are reacting because free trade is not working for them. International markets are not working for them. And people are going bankrupt and they're going hungry. And that's what we're seeing. And perhaps the thing that we can regret about this is the unusual amount of violence that was linked to these protests and that has created big human rights issues as well. So we're very concerned, but it's a reaction, I think. It's a reaction all over the country in terms of what is happening within in terms of free trade and in general economics growing.
Well,
Things are not working.
Alberto, you set the stage for this. Some of our community members are focusing on the farmers at the heart of it all. Saif Malik says farmers, especially in poor countries, can only rely on their collective power to ensure their rights and conditions are upheld. And Jenny on Facebook says Colombia is an agricultural country where the farmers live in poverty because the government has forgot them. They feed us every day, but our farmers are living a tragedy right now. So, Robert, can you clearly explain to our audience what the farmers are asking for?
Hello, Robert. Can you hear us?
First of all, thank you for having me in your show. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you beautifully and we see you, so go ahead.
What I was saying is that the farmers, thank you. What I was saying is that what the farmers are asking the Santos administration is to have protect.
Looks like there's a slight delay. Alberto, do you want to lay it out for us? I mean, you briefly did in the intro, but what are the farmers' demands?
Well, farmers' demands are basically protection for their goods, for their products. We are having grave problems, very serious problems in terms of access to markets, internal markets and external markets. And farmers in Colombia need legislation to protect, and that's exactly what free trade has put an end to. And I think that's the basic demand. And also we need promotion, we need support. We need policies, public policy that support production, that support poor farmers, that give them access to land, which is another big issue. In general, we have government policies turning their backs on farmers and looking for international markets and for other sources of these products, and that's what's creating these farmers to go on back and to practically go bankrupt. We are not producing in Colombia our food. We are not producing enough to support our demands, especially in terms of food, and that's a very serious problem. And that's what created this worldwide renowned mobilization and these protests. And these protests are not going to end because solutions are not here yet.
Juan Carlos?
Yeah, so this is interesting. Colombian farmers want access to international markets, which means that they believe in free trade, right? That is free trade. Exporting is free trade. And actually, we look at the stats, the agricultural stats of Colombia in the last 13 years, we see that Colombia has an agricultural surplus when it comes to exporting. It exports more agricultural products than it imports, which means that some sectors of the agricultural output of Colombia are doing extremely well. Now, there are some sectors that are doing bad, and we have to look at the reasons why they're doing bad. Is it because of free trade agreements? Well, these free trade agreements have been implemented only for over a year. The FTA with the United States went into effect in May 2012. Most of these provisions haven't even gone into effect yet. Most of the tariff elimination schedule is still is going to be phased out within the next 17 years. So we cannot blame free trade agreements for something that has been happening for a while in Colombia, which is the troubles of the Colombian farmers.
Which sectors are doing really well?
With sectors, well, we have some sectors that are competitive internationally when it comes to exports of fruits, when it comes to exports of coffee at some point. Now they're not doing that well because their costs have gone up. When it comes to export of flowers, etc., etc. Those are
the rest
sectors.
Has been wiped out. The rest has been wiped out.
Well, but is it because of free trade?
Well, free trade enhances and reinforces structural problems.
Do we have lower tariffs?
Free trade does not help. The actual free trade agreements.
Do we have lower tariffs on those products now than we had 2 years ago?
Yeah, but I think that internal markets are fine, and that's okay. And I think that Colombian products can go to the internal markets as well, but international markets as well. But I think that the basic preoccupation of farmers and peasants in Colombia is their access to internal markets. That's where the problem, I think, is really happening.
So how can we blame FTAs for that?
Markets.
How can we blame FTAs for that?
We are consuming potatoes from Canada, and we're consuming potatoes from other countries. We're consuming basic commodities and basic crops like wheat, wheat, and I forget that now. Something. Well, basic products that have been wiped out of Colombian production, which have to do with food for people.
Do you know how much potatoes? You know how much potatoes Colombia imports from the United States?
Well, I wouldn't really know that, as a matter of fact.
Only $7 million worth of potatoes. Panama, which is 1/13 of the population of Colombia, imports more potatoes from the United States than Colombia. So then again, if we look at the data, if we left the rhetoric out, if we look at the data, we see that the FTA has only been in place for only 1 year. Most of the tariffs are still in place. The amount of imports from the United States is pretty small. I cannot be responsible for the troubles of Colombian farmers.
Robert, I know you've been trying to jump in. Go ahead.
Yeah. I just wanted to point out, just to blame FTA would not be fair either, speaking of fair. There are also local policies in Colombia that have widened the poverty gap between the farmers and the general population. There was one policy back in the Álvaro Uribe administration called Agro Ingreso Seguro, which was supposed actually to provide subsidies to small farmers. But when in reality what occurred was that the wealthy landowners took a lot of advantage of these programs, who, by the way, was not under oversight from the Álvaro Uribe administration. And the result is not only that the level playing field did not take place, but we have the former Minister of Agriculture. His name is Andrés Felipe Arias, who is now under custody. So there are also local policies within Colombia that are not providing important incentives to agriculture. But also, as the FTA comes into full swing, it's really important for not just the Santos administration, but for ensuing administrations to guarantee subsidies to small producers, which is basically what Obama has been encouraging too. President Obama in the United States encouraged business who produce employment within the United States and do not outsource any kind of agricultural products, outside of the United States. So I think that it has to be a combination, and I think that would be a great way to balance the current inequalities that occur in the countryside of Colombia.
Right, gentlemen, I'm going to literally ask you just to hold that thought. Remember where you are, Malika.
Well, we've talked about the free trade agreement. We also mentioned the U.S. There's a Facebook comment here from Scott who says, would you rather have Colombian farmers pay to export their products to the U.S.? Without a free trade agreement, Colombian farmers would have to pay an import tax to the U.S. So that's one side. But Juan Carlos, we also have this one from Sonia, who says free trade agreements have to be done in equal conditions. Otherwise, they're unfair. Everyone knows that the USA has subsidies for its peasants, it says. So what about the subsidy issue?
Indeed, you know that most of the subsidies,
farmers see that.
Most of the subsidies in the United States go to products which aren't produced in Colombia, in most of the cases. But there are certain cases, like in the case of rice, like in the case of wheat, where effectively Colombia produces those products. Now we have to look at several factors here. Again, those tariffs will be phased out. Those tariffs will be phased out in a period of up to 20 years. It's not that they're facing immediate tariff elimination. No, we will have to wait up to 2033 in order to see actually free trade in those goods.
So Juan Carlos Alberto, and he's sitting there in Colombia, he's saying that's not exactly true.
Okay, how?
Okay, we're having difficulties with wheat. That's something that was part of the protests right now. What we call the cold climate crops, where protests were more severe. But I want to specify something. I mean, free trade agreements with the United States have been going on in full swing for about a year. But the tendencies, the economic tendencies of free trade, despite the agreements, have been going on for about 10 or 12 years now. And that's what wiped out a Colombian economy, and especially Colombian rural economy. So
again, the question
what we're facing here is a tendency.
The question is very simple. Are tariff levels right now lower than 2 years ago? Are tariff levels lower right now than 2 years ago when it comes to these agricultural products? Are we having a flow of imports from the United States duty free higher now than 2 years ago?
Not exactly yet, but we will.
So how come we can blame free trade for something that is been taking place for such a while?
Because we can see the tendency.
No, it's not a tendency factor. It's a reality from now.
The model and the tendency is what is not working, and the model and the tendency is going to be reinforced throughout the years with the free trade agreement.
Now, free trade
was designed to impose international markets and international producers on small-time Colombian farmers, and that's what's
I have to point out something that he is right in the fact that eventually those tariffs are going to be eliminated. That's a fact. And then you will have full competition in play. Once American farmers realize the potential,
that's not true. I mean,
once American farmers realize the potential of the third largest consumer market in Latin America, which is Colombia, well, they're going to export more goods to Colombia. But look, you have to look at the other side of the coin. Colombian consumers will benefit from lower prices. Yeah, 32% of the Colombian population live below the poverty line. They will benefit from cheaper agricultural products because that means that their expenditures are going to be lower.
All right, Carlos, I want Carlos take a breath. Alberto, you go ahead.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Femi. That is exactly what has not been working for the last 10 to 15 years.
Free market in the last 10 years.
That was a very short breath, Juan Carlos, a slightly longer breath so that Alberto can actually make his counter-argument. Go ahead, Alberto.
Yes, that is exactly what has not been working in Colombia, because there has been a promise that free trade, whether it be international free trade or internal free trade, and neoliberal policies will benefit consumers. But you cannot benefit consumers when your production line is faltering, when you don't have economics working, when you don't have producers producing so that you can buy consumer goods and you can buy consumer markets. Colombia is a country that has been impovering its population, and we don't have right now a stable economy that can buy what international markets have to offer.
So Alberto,
we're producing. That's what the farmers is all about. That's what the farmers' protest is all about.
Would you, in an ideal world, would you get rid of the free trade agreement? Would you tinker with it? What would you do?
I know we want to renegotiate free trade agreement with the United States and with Canada. That's something that we've been saying, and that's something that farmers have been saying. We want renegotiation of the free trade agreement, and we want protection of our internal production.
But not just that, and I'm sorry to chip in, but I really have to, have to jump into the conversation. It's not just the FTA. Globalization is happening no matter what. It's not just the FTA with the United States or Canada or South Korea or Mexico. We have now what we call the Pacific Alliance, which is a larger economic bloc between Colombia, Mexico, Chile, Peru, and soon to be Costa Rica and Panama. So competition is going to have actually take place, which is good because that improves the competitiveness of Colombia. Colombia right now is the 7th most competitive country in Latin America, being surpassed by Costa Rica, Panama, and other smaller countries like Uruguay. I think we have to see this from the larger perspective, not just the economic. We've been discussing the economy part of it, but there's also one important thing going on right now in Colombia, which is the peace agreement with the FARC. One of the main points that FARC is making is an agrarian reform that they have been, fighting for since its inception. And I'm not a guerrilla sympathizer by all means, but it's a really important point. It's a crucial point in Colombian politics that they have to look into agrarian politics today. And once everyone comes into an agreement, not just providing subsidies to farmers who could be potentially affected by the incoming of products from overseas, but once these solutions come into place, Colombia will actually, is on the threshold of peace that has been long overdue in the last 50 years.
Okay.
It's really important
let me just squeeze a community voice in here before we hurtle towards the end of the main show, to be continued, obviously.
Well, Robert mentioned something interesting. You mentioned FARC, which is the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. We got a couple of comments of that from our community. Brasida says Colombia, with a 50-year-old conflict referencing FARC and a very repressive government, she says, is not known for this kind of mobilization. Farmers are desperate because their livelihood is really being destroyed. And we have another video comment on that same topic. Alberto, I'd like you to have listened to this.
I think what's happening is, opposition is building in Colombia. And historically, when this has happened, it has tended to be accompanied by a wave of political repression and violence at the hands of the state and paramilitary actors.
So, Alberto, both of those comments loosely referenced FARC. Is something that we're seeing today unprecedented? The fact that these protests are allowed to happen?
I think we're seeing a reaction, definitely in Colombia, and a reaction by the population, by urban and rural populations, and that's definite. That's something that we're starting to get used to. Secondly, I think that the free trade agreements are not the idea that the peace negotiations reforms are leading to. I think that peace negotiations are calling for a second look at globalization and free trade agreements. That's not something that's on the peace agenda exactly. Quite the contrary. I think that that's creating a lot more problems for a peaceful transition in Colombia. And thirdly, I would tend to agree with what I just listened to. The levels of repression and violence in Colombia are still very high, and that's something that we saw in the protest movements just this month.
FARC are proposing 10 points. The FARC, the guerrillas, are proposing 10 points on the agrarian reform. Yes, you're absolutely right. One of the 10 points is to review the free trade agreement, but there's way more than that. It's also the assurance of mining, because there's a lot of mining companies coming into Colombia to explore ore or gold or anything like this. So it's just one of the points.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is we have to look at the broader perspective. So it's just one of the points. But there are 10
access to land. Access to land.
Alberto, let me ask you something, and Robert and Juan Carlos as well. Alberto, you have more to say, right?
No, I agree
Okay,
with
Robert
what I
has more to
just
say,
said.
and Juan Carlos also has more to say.
I took my breath already.
Yes, thank you. This means that we are definitely going to have a really interesting post show at stream.aljazeera.com. Gentlemen, to be continued, I promise you. But before we do that, Malik has a look at some of the other stories the stream is following.
Putting one rumor to rest, China's announced that it will, in fact, be cracking down on web users who spread false information online. Until today, there had only been talk of the government's plans to institute stricter online censorship policies. But the Supreme People's Court confirmed Monday that people who post rumors will face 3 years in prison if their comments are visited by more than 5,000 people or reposted more than 500 times. The news and the relative low number of shares that could lead to jail time had netizens upset. One Sina Weibo user posts, "It's far too easy for something to be reposted 500 times or get 5,000 views. Who's going to dare say anything now?" Well, we head to India next, where violence in Uttar Pradesh left at least 31 people dead. Clashes erupted Saturday after Hindu farmers gathered to demand justice for the August 27th killing of 3 men who spoke out when they saw a woman being harassed. Some at the meeting allegedly called for Muslims to be killed, and the farmers were reportedly attacked after the meeting. Using hashtag #UPRiots, many online debated how the violence spread as fast as it did, with some pointing the finger at mainstream media for exacerbating tensions. Others argued social media played a bigger role. The tweets, "One has to agree the deep impact hate videos that go viral have to escalate tensions." Well, one of those videos going viral circulating reportedly shows a mob lynching 2 boys, but many cautioned against spreading what they called fake footage. Malik tweets, "Heard that it's all because of some fake video. Friends, analyze before you share in social media." There's more on this at stream.aljazeera.com/stories. Femi?
I'm just looking at Juan Carlos checking his tweets. How are they doing? I'm actually on your Twitter
Good.
feed right now. How much do you tweet, Juan Carlos?
Frequently.
Yes.
I would say like 60% in Spanish and 40% in English.
Very good. I actually had to
So-
translate from Spanish into
Yeah.
English so I could keep up with you. 9,614 followers. So I'll check that up at the end of the post show to see if anybody adds another follow on to you as well. Thank you so much. We will be back talking about free trade in Colombia and the free trade agreement between the US and Colombia, and whether it's actually hurting or actually helping the country. Meanwhile, what's on the next show? Well, Malaysian politician Nurul Izzah Ibrahim will be in the stream. Join us on Tuesday to see why some are predicting that she will become Malaysia's first female prime minister. Stay with us. The post show is next at stream.aljazeera.com. See you online. Thanks for watching. Hello again, this is the Streams Online Post Show. We've been discussing the free trade debate in Colombia as well as getting an update on the ongoing farmers' strike there. We have on set Juan Carlos Hidalgo. He's a trade policy analyst with the Cato Institute. On Skype in Bogota, Alberto Bejarano is a labor advisor to the Colombian Senate. And also on Skype in New York, we have Robert Valencia. He's a writer with Global Voices Online. There was something that caught my eye, Alberto. It was a tweet from a social organization called a Marcha Patriótica, and it says the blockade may be over, but the strike goes on. Can you give us an update on what happened over the weekend and how much progress was made regarding the strikes?
Yes, the protest movement is not off. The negotiations have been reached, and a lot of the protests are, as a matter of fact, have been postponed to await for more conversations with national governments starting this week. But we still have the basic demands are still on, and I think we're still going on for a long period of protests, especially in the rural areas and urban areas as well.
See, I've been listening to you, all three of you. I've been listening to Robert and Alberto and you, Juan Carlos, and then I'm seeing farmers taking to the streets and their livelihoods are being put at risk. And I hear you talking about tariffs, but I'm seeing people who are obviously poverty-stricken and need help. You have a lot of answers, Juan Carlos. What is your answer to this?
You cannot deny that Colombian farmers are struggling, some of them. And it is precise that the government actually helps them. But how? By lowering their costs. They face enormous costs. Up to 80% of their costs are inputs, especially fertilizers. It is interesting, for example, that they're asking the Santos administration to abolish tariffs on fertilizers because they face stiff tariffs on fertilizers. So in that regard, they are admitting that free trade is good for them, at least when it comes to abolishing fertilizers. They have serious infrastructure problems. Colombia is a country with a tortuous geography. Like bringing goods from the mountains to the markets takes several steps, and that increases dramatically the cost. Well, that's a problem that needs to be dwelt with. And the other one, the other problem, and they were talking before about, is the land issue. Of course, Colombia has had a civil conflict for almost 50 years, where there is a huge, enormous land problem. You have millions of people displaced within the country that don't have access to their lands. Well, that is why reaching a peace agreement is so important in order to start making progress in having people having access to their lands and actually being able to cultivate their land. But this is something that's going to take time. In the meantime, we cannot rely to the same old recipes of just protectionism, which they hurt the poorest the most because they increased the prices of their food stuff.
Robert.
I just wanted to add one more thing. Thank you. I just wanted to add one more thing to what Juan Carlos is saying. This has to be taken into motion within the rule of law. Unfortunately, what the campesinos or the farmers are being greatly affected by the internal conflict. And I cite you one example. In 2007, Chiquita Brands, one of the largest banana producers in the world, who used to be called United Fruit Company, was hiring right-wing mercenaries called the paramilitares, or paramilitares in Spanish. And they had to hire them to protect banana plantations in what we call the zona bananera, or the banana zone in Colombia, near the Caribbean Sea. And they were supposedly protecting banana plantations, but when in reality what they were doing were torturing and killing banana farmers and growers. It's really important that in the context we are in, that rule of law will be spread all across the country, because then international companies will be taking things into their own hands. And we had the cases of Chiquita Brands that they had to leave Colombia because they were using, they were basically circumventing, they were bypassing the rule of law. They were bypassing Colombian law enforcement to protect their lands, but in reality what they were causing was more mayhem and more problems than solutions. It's really important that with an FTA or whatever agreement we're coming in, there has to be a framework of security for farmers who have been greatly affected, not just by the violence they have been enduring, but just because also the guerrillas have recruited by force to male farmers into the rank and file. It's really important to have that security framework as well.
I would have two things to say about what I just heard. First, I would say that FTA, free trade agreements with the United States are not going to give legal security to small landowners. They're going to get, what we're seeing here, the tendency is very clear in Colombia. What we're seeing here is big transnationals investing enormous sums of money legally or illegally in terms of securing and reinforcing the structure of land property in Colombia, which is, of course, designed and enforced for big landowners. So that is something that free trade agreement is not going to work. Not going to work for small landowners, it's not going to work for small farmers, it's not going to work for workers. It's going to work for big business and big corporations and big transnationals. That's what we're seeing. Not only with Chiquita, but we're also seeing it, for example, with Drummond, which is an American company, a United States coal company, which is exploiting workers and exploiting territory and resources to export coal to the United States and to Canada and to Europe through free trade agreements. That's it, and that's also the case in oil, with oil transnationals in Colombia devastating the country to export oil to international markets. That's what we're seeing. We're not going to see free trade agreements protecting small landowners. And secondly, the armed conflict in Colombia is not the cause of problems in terms of land access. It's I would say it's basically a consequence of the way that land and rural areas have been developing throughout the last maybe 100 years.
Gentlemen, let me bring in the community. Malika.
A lot of them are asking about the government's role in all of this and what role they will have to play. There's a video comment here, like all of our guests today, to have a listen.
Hi, I'm Juan Sebastián López from the National Student Board. We want to express our support to the agriculture strike in the whole country. The students are right now in the streets, and this week we have many demonstrations in the whole country against free trade agreement, against the big crisis which is in right now the education in Colombia, and we expect that the government stop the sign of the free trade agreements and take in account the points of view of the whole society.
Well, on that theme of the government, we also got a tweet from Peter who says, people brought the government and the government must work to improve the living standard of the people. So Alberto, I want to go back to you with that one. What is the government going to do?
Well, government is supporting big business. That's what government is doing in Colombia and internationally. Presidente Santos' administration is big business. It's big corporations. It's big oil companies. It's big coal mining companies. It's gold. It's enhancing the transformation of Colombia into a raw materials producer, which is not adding, is not producing manufactured goods, is not developing economies, is not protecting small landowners. That's what President Santos is doing, and he is working on a peace negotiation, which will finally have to deal with the fact that the economic model is not a model that takes into consideration the needs of the people of Colombia. That's the way we're seeing it right here. That's the way we see it here.
There's a cartoon that I want to show our audience watching, and it's a cartoon that's on my laptop here, and it's been going around Colombia. And on the left-hand side, or the right-hand side, my left, your right, you can work it out, paro qua paro. So it's the president saying, strike what strike, and then we have the farmer on the other side going, presidente qua presidente, which is president what president. Robert, what do you make of the way that the president in Colombia has been dealing with the strike?
Well, President Santos has been dealing with a lot of issues lately. I mean, it's not just the FTA, it's not just the strike. There are a couple of going back to the political framework within this, is that, first of all, President Santos will be announcing sooner or later whether he's going to be reelected next year. This is political season right now. Colombia will go to polls next year to elect a new president, whether he's going to be reelected or whether Francisco Santos, who is basically Álvaro Uribe's wingman, will be reelected. So there's a lot of things at stake. Not just the paro. I mean, he was trying to turn a blind eye, but he's dealing with a lot of things. Another point that I wanted to add that is kind of derailing from what the conversation we're having is the fact that Colombian pride is at stake as well. We had the recent court when the International Criminal Court gave Nicaragua more maritime territories to Nicaragua after a litigation that basically Colombia has partially lost in November. So there's a lot of political strife. There's a lot of political brinkmanship, and Santos is to basically solve he's trying to solve himself.
Okay.
From all the things that are happening in Colombia right now.
All right, Robert, I'm just wrapping up with everybody, so I want you to do this for me in 2 sentences because I'm going to ask all of our guests to do this. Have you heard anything in the last 40 minutes that has made you change your mind about the free trade agreement between the US and Colombia?
My position is that globalization is taking place. There's a lot of integration, as Juan Carlos have pointed out. It's inevitable. Now with the Pacific Alliance, not only Colombia is entering in competition within his Latin American neighbors, but also with Asian, with China, and other bigger markets. What is really important in this case is that all these new economic trends is really important to ensure and to strengthen local laws in Colombia, be it intellectual property, be it agrarian reforms. They have to strengthen their own rule of law and the Constitution and all the laws that will eventually take
Juan Carlos,
place after the sign.
Have you heard anything in this 40-minute conversation that made you just change your position? You came in with a very distinct position. How are you leaving?
I'm leaving the same. We have an admission that there isn't free trade now. The free trade is going to take place eventually, but the FTAs have been in place indeed, but they haven't lowered tariffs, and the amount of imports from the United States is very small. We cannot blame those FTAs for the troubles of Colombian farmers.
Alberto, you've been listening to a lot of conversation outside of Colombia about what's happening inside Colombia. Has it changed your opinion at all?
Well, sometimes when I listen to President Obama speaking for the United States people, I say that's exactly what we need here too. We need to protect our internal market. We need to protect our jobs. We need to protect our economy. But that's not working for Colombia in terms of free trade agreements. That's exactly what we want. We want economy. We want jobs. We want production, and we need to develop in a fair economic arrangement. That's what we're not getting, and I think Colombia is not exactly going into a peaceful transition if these policies and tendencies continue.
Alberto, Robert, Juan Carlos, we really enjoyed your conversation and your company. Final words, the community.
Oh, Femi, to answer your question, I don't know if we changed any minds, but there is a tweet here that sums up both sides. Nicholas says, benefits to free trade are spread across many. The costs are placed upon a few. Of course, you can keep them coming, your questions and your comments. The conversation always continues online.
And on Tuesday's show, Malaysian politician Nurul Izzah Ibrahim will be in the stream. Join us then to see why some are predicting that she will become Malaysia's first female Prime Minister. But until then, we will be online at stream.aljazeera.com. Thanks for watching. Take care.